The regime survives by repression, by complete blockade on information with the security services and field tactics.
Sometimes people describe North Korea as a black hole of information, and that black hole has become significantly darker over the last few years.
There are a couple of specialist news organizations that have a network of sources in North Korea. We decided to try and work with one of these organizations to speak directly to people in the country so that we can understand what was happening.
North Korea is facing a serious demographic crisis, so severe that even Kim Jong-un has shown rare public emotion, tearfully urging women to have more children. This moment reflects growing alarm in one of the world's most isolated and authoritarian regimes. Central to the crisis is North Korea's total fertility rate, which currently stands at 1.79 births per woman, far below the replacement level of 2.1 needed to maintain population stability. Although the country's population is around 26 million and still appears to be growing, projections indicate a decline could begin by the mid-2030s, with the working-age population potentially shrinking as early as 2030. Falling fertility rates are not unique to North Korea. Neighboring countries like China, Japan, and South Korea are also experiencing even lower TFRs. However, these nations are wealthy and technologically advanced, capable of offsetting labor shortages through automation, innovation, and immigration. In contrast, North Korea's low-income, manual labor-dependent economy lacks access to global markets or modern technology. It cannot rely on machines or foreign workers to fill the gaps, especially in labor-intensive sectors like agriculture, construction, and the military. Normally, poorer countries have higher fertility rates. Sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, averages about 5 births per woman. But North Korea defies this trend. Despite being one of the world's poorest countries with a GNI per capita of just 1,210 cents, it has a fertility rate comparable to the world's most developed nations. This puts North Korea in a demographic trap. It is growing old before becoming rich, leaving it ill-prepared for the social and economic strains of a declining and aging population. North Korea's demographic problems are deeply rooted in its modern history. Following the end of Japanese colonial rule in 1945, the Korean peninsula was split. The North was backed by the Soviet Union and China, and the South was supported by the United States. As South Korea evolved into a wealthy democracy, the North remained isolated and militarized under strict communist rule. Decades of economic hardship, limited healthcare, frequent food shortages, and oppressive social control have made it increasingly difficult for families, especially women, to raise children, contributing to smaller family sizes over time. North Korea's demographic crisis has deep historical roots tied to war, economic mismanagement, and decades of authoritarian rule. Following Japan's defeat in World War II, Korea was divided into a communist north, backed by the USSR and China, and a capitalist south, supported by the US. In 1950, the ideological divide sparked the Korean War, which lasted 3 years, caused millions of deaths, and devastated North Korea. From a population of 9.3 million in 1945, the North lost over 1 million people due to war casualties and mass migration to the South. After the 1953 armistice, North Korea began reconstruction with help from Soviet and Chinese allies. Population grew from 8.4 million in 1953 to 15 million by the 1970s, driven by a centrally planned economy, industrialization, and improved welfare. Fertility peaked at nearly 4 children per woman by 1970. In the late 1970s, North Korea's economy began to falter. It borrowed heavily from the West, but failed to repay due to low export capacity. Rising global interest rates and agricultural neglect worsened food shortages. Relations with China and the Soviet Union cooled, reducing aid. In response, the government promoted population control, encouraging smaller families and making birth control and abortion widely available. Fertility declined from 2.8 in 1980 to 1.9 in 2000. Later, the regime reversed course, banning abortions and encouraging larger families. The 1990s collapse of the Soviet Union triggered North Korea's worst crisis, the arduous March, 1994 to 98. Without fuel or fertilizer imports, agriculture collapsed, leading to a famine that killed up to 3 million people, around 12% of the population. It was the first time fertility dropped below replacement level. Those born after the famine, shaped by hunger and poverty, are now less inclined to start families. The famine brought a significant gender shift. While men were forced into unpaid state labor, women entered informal markets to keep their families alive, making them key economic actors. This redefinition of gender roles remains today. Many women now delay or forego marriage and childbirth, prioritizing financial stability over ideological loyalty. Defectors say modern North Korean women seek partners who offer security, not political status, a major cultural change. With high costs of child-rearing, scarce resources, and dual burdens of work and domestic duties, many women view avoiding marriage and motherhood as a rational choice. In this climate, traditional milestones like family and childbearing are no longer essential for younger generations. Facing a severe population decline, Kim Jong-un's regime blames Western capitalist values for the rise in anti-marriage and anti-childbearing sentiments among women, declaring that women best serve the nation by marrying and having many children. But many North Koreans reject this view. As one defector relayed, "How do you expect women to raise children when we don't even have basics like food or washing machines?" North Korea's demographic crisis is deeply tied to its ongoing economic hardship. Chronic food shortages, worsened by natural disasters and poor agricultural output, have persisted since the state's founding. Malnutrition remains widespread, affecting nearly half the population, and 1 in 5 children suffer from it. Children's average height and weight have declined since the 1980s, a clear sign of nutritional stress. Though healthcare is constitutionally free, it is vastly under-resourced. Sanctions, lack of supplies, outdated equipment, and a shortage of trained professionals mean that many die from preventable diseases. Pregnant women and children are particularly vulnerable, which further lowers fertility and raises mortality. International sanctions, imposed over North Korea's nuclear activities, further constrain the economy, worsening the food and healthcare crises. Meanwhile, the Songun, military-first policy continues to divert resources away from healthcare, education, and welfare, key sectors for supporting families. North Korea suffers a housing shortage, with only 70 to 80% of households adequately housed. Combined with state repression, harsh punishments, and a climate of fear, many citizens are reluctant to raise children in such an environment. Defections also contribute to the population crisis. Although strict border controls during COVID-19 reduced numbers, South Korea reported that defections tripled in 2023. Most defectors are young, working-age adults, leading to population loss and brain drain, as educated individuals leave permanently. Unlike other countries, immigration is not an option for North Korea. It remains one of the world's most ethnically homogeneous and isolated nations, with the regime viewing outsiders as ideological threats. Foreign settlement is effectively banned, and population replenishment through immigration is off the table. To counter the trend, North Korea has implemented pro-natalist measures since 2007. The state encourages large families as a patriotic duty and offers incentives like extra rations, childcare, and preferential housing, especially for parents of triplets or quadruplets. On major holidays, multi-child families receive school supplies, food, and medicine. However, the effectiveness of these programs is limited by ongoing economic hardship and scarcity. To combat its falling birth rate, North Korea has introduced several pro-natalist policies. Mothers who have a second child receive 6 months of extra food, and pregnant women are now entitled to 240 days of maternity leave, monthly medical checkups, and prenatal-postnatal subsidies of 3,000 won. However, that amount can't even buy 2 lobes of rice in local markets, exposing the limitations of state support. In 2015, the government took harsher steps, banning abortions and birth control devices like IUDs. Doctors performing secret abortions, often to supplement their meager state salaries, face 5 to 10 years in prison, despite efforts like increasing doctor pay 40x. There's also been a crackdown on vendors selling smuggled contraceptives. To prevent population loss through defection, North Korea has tightened border controls, increased surveillance, and imposed harsh punishments on escapees and those returned from China. Yet the regime fails to recognize that ideology isn't the root cause of declining fertility. Economic hardship is. Rather than reforming the economy, Pyongyang treats falling birth rates as an ideological issue. Instead of reducing low-paying government jobs or expanding the private sector, the regime has cracked down on small businesses. Kim Jong-un also refuses to trade nuclear concessions for sanctions relief, which would allow the country to access essential machinery and materials, leaving labor-intensive sectors like agriculture vulnerable to workforce decline. A shrinking working-age population and aging society will raise the dependency ratio, making it harder for the state to care for the elderly with limited resources. Agriculture, already suffering from labor shortages, will likely further worsen food insecurity, creating a vicious cycle of malnutrition and population loss. A declining population also threatens military strength. North Korea currently relies on 1.3 million active soldiers, 5% of its population, more than double South Korea's despite having half the population. A demographic collapse would erode this numerical advantage and limit foreign policy leverage.